I wasn't looking for anything that day. I was just cleaning a car that didn't feel like mine anymore. Then my hand slipped inside the door lining, and I felt it. An envelope. Hidden. Waiting. I opened it without thinking. The handwriting. Soft curves. Careful spacing. It looked like mine, but carried a memory I couldn't reach. Inside, a photograph. A woman standing in sunlight, her face violently crossed out in red. On the back, my name, written in a script I didn't recognize. Some things aren't hidden to protect us. Some things wait to be found when the past decides you're finally ready to remember.
The car had been sitting in the driveway for 3 weeks. Daniel kept saying he would sell it, but the sign never went up. The dust gathered on the windshield in patterns that looked almost deliberate, like someone had traced words there and then thought better of it. I told him I would clean it out. He looked at me the way he always did then, with a kind of careful gentleness that made me feel like something fragile he was afraid to set down too hard. He said I didn't have to. I said I wanted to. The truth was simpler than that. I needed something to do with my hands that wasn't arranging flowers or pretending I remembered the names of customers who greeted me like old friends. The car smelled like old air freshener and leather that had cracked in places. I opened all 4 doors to let the February cold move through it. The glove compartment held registration papers, a tire pressure gauge, receipts from gas stations I apparently had been to. I stared at the dates, trying to feel something like recognition. There was nothing under the seats except an old protein bar wrapper and a hair tie I must have dropped months ago. The trunk was empty except for a spare tire and a first aid kit that looked untouched. I almost stopped there, but something made me run my hand along the inside panel of the driver's door, the way I had learned to check coat pockets before donating clothes. My fingers found a gap in the lining near the armrest, a place where the fabric had come loose or been pulled deliberately. I felt paper. The envelope came out slowly, stuck against the foam backing. It was a standard white envelope, slightly yellowed, the kind I could buy in packs at the grocery store. No address on the front, no stamp, just my name written in blue ink across the center. Sophia. I had seen that handwriting before. My hands felt cold, even though I was wearing gloves. I sat in the driver's seat, with the door still open, and turned the envelope over. The seal had been broken at some point and then pressed closed again, leaving a faint crease. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded twice, and something else that shifted when I tilted it. I pulled out the paper first. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope. Soft, looping letters that looked like they had been written with care, not speed. The date at the top said October 17th, last year, 5 months before the accident that I could not remember, the one that had taken something from me that doctors said might come back but probably wouldn't. The letter was addressed to no one. It just began. It said that the writer needed to put words down before losing the courage, before convincing herself again that silence was safer than truth. She had been carrying something alone for so long that it had become part of her posture, the way she held her shoulders, the weight she couldn't explain to anyone who asked why she looked so tired. There had been a version of her that existed before Daniel, a version that made choices she couldn't undo and wouldn't want to if she could, because they led to everything that came after. But she was afraid of what would happen if she kept pretending that version had never existed. She had been someone else once, not in metaphor, in fact. I stopped reading. My chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the cold air. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page, even though I already knew what it would say. Sophia. My name in my handwriting. A letter I had written to myself and then hidden in the lining of a car door. The second item slipped out when I unfolded the paper again. A photograph, slightly faded, the edges soft from handling. A woman standing in bright sunlight outside a building I didn't recognize. She was turned slightly away from the camera, her profile catching the light. Dark hair pulled back, light dress that moved in a breeze I couldn't see. Her face had been crossed out. 2 thick red lines, drawn with something that had bled slightly into the photo paper. Deliberate. Violent in the way only careful violence can be. The kind of mark someone makes when they want to erase something but can't quite bring themselves to destroy it completely. I turned the photo over. On the back, in the same handwriting as the letter, a single line. The person I was before I became the person you are now. And below that, in smaller letters, almost an afterthought, her name was Camila. I sat in that car for 20 minutes without moving. The cold crept in through the open doors until my fingers went numb, but I couldn't make myself get out. I kept reading the letter, looking at the photograph, trying to find some crack in reality that would explain what I was holding. The doctors had told me after the accident that my memories from before might never return. They used words like traumatic brain injury and retrograde amnesia and cognitive restructuring. They said my brain had protected itself by letting go of certain things, and that trying to force those memories back could do more harm than good. Daniel had been patient, more than patient. He learned to introduce me to people I had apparently known for years, to laugh gently when I asked questions about our own wedding, to show me photographs of a life I had lived but could not recall. He never made me feel broken, even when I knew I was. But he had never mentioned anyone named Camila, and I had never thought to ask if the person I was before the accident had been someone other than Sophia. The letter continued on the back of the page. It explained that the writer had changed her name when she was 23. It wasn't witness protection or anything dramatic like that. It was simpler and more complicated at the same time. She had left a place that had marked her in ways she couldn't carry anymore, and she decided that the person who had lived through those things didn't have to keep living through them. Camila stayed behind. Sophia moved forward. For a long time it worked. She built a life that felt clean. She met Daniel, and he loved her without knowing where she had come from, and that felt like grace. She didn't lie to him, she just didn't tell him everything. And the longer she waited, the harder it became to find the right moment. But lately she had been thinking about her more. About Camila. About the things she knew that Sophia pretended she didn't. About the people she loved who had no idea where she went. She didn't know if she would ever show the letter to anyone. Maybe writing it down was enough. Maybe hiding it somewhere she would forget about it was the closest she could come to honesty. If I was reading it, Sophia, it meant something had happened. It meant I had become someone who needed to know where I came from, even if it changed everything about where I thought I was going. The handwriting wavered slightly in the last few lines, as if the person writing had been crying or shaking, as if I had been crying or shaking when I wrote it. I should have remembered something, some flash of recognition, some feeling that connected the words on the page to the person sitting in the car reading them, but there was nothing. Just a terrible absence where memory should have been, and the growing certainty that the accident hadn't taken my past from me. I had already given it away, before the crash ever happened. I didn't tell Daniel about the letter right away. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because I needed time to understand it myself first. Maybe because some part of me, the part that had written those words and hidden them, knew that sharing them would change things in ways I couldn't control. I put the envelope back where I found it and finished cleaning the car in mechanical movements, wiping down surfaces and vacuuming floor mats while my mind turned in circles.
When I went back inside, Daniel was making dinner, and he asked if everything was okay. I told him I was just tired. He believed me because he trusted me, because in the year since the accident, I had never given him a reason not to. That night I lay awake next to him, listening to his breathing settle into sleep, and thought about the photograph, the woman with her face crossed out, the name I didn't recognize, but that apparently belonged to me, Camila. I tried saying it silently, shaping my mouth around the syllables. It felt foreign and familiar at the same time, like a word in a language I spoke as a child but forgot as I grew up, something that lived in muscle memory but not conscious thought. In the morning, I went to the flower shop where I worked, the one Daniel told me I had opened 3 years ago, before the accident. The space was small and filled with natural light, and I had apparently designed it myself, though I couldn't remember doing it. My coworker Jen greeted me the way she always did, with easy warmth and inside jokes I didn't quite get but had learned to laugh at anyway. I arranged bouquets for a wedding I wouldn't attend, and wrapped stems in paper while customers came and went. Some of them called me by name. Some of them asked how I was feeling, a question that had followed me everywhere since the accident, as if being well was something I needed to prove. But all day I kept thinking about the letter. There was another photo.
That phrase had been in my mind since I woke up, though I couldn't remember reading it in the letter. It felt like something I knew without knowing how I knew it. During my lunch break, I walked 3 blocks to a storage facility I had a key for, but no memory of renting. Daniel had shown me the unit once, shortly after I came home from the hospital. He said it held things from my old apartment, from before we moved in together, boxes I had never gotten around to sorting through. He offered to help me go through them, but I had told him I wasn't ready. The truth was, I had been afraid of opening boxes filled with a life I couldn't remember living. Now I wondered what else I had been afraid of. The unit was small, maybe 6 by 8 feet, and stacked with plastic bins and cardboard boxes. Most were labeled in handwriting I recognized as mine. Kitchen stuff, books, winter clothes, practical categories for a practical person. But in the back corner, half hidden behind a stack of bins labeled tax documents, was a single box with no label at all. I pulled it out and sat on the concrete floor. The tape had yellowed, but held. I broke the seal with my car key and folded back the flaps. Inside were things that didn't match the life I thought I knew. A passport with my face and the name Camila Ferreira Torres. Issued 8 years ago, expired 2 years ago. The photo showed someone who looked like me, but younger, with longer hair and eyes that hadn't learned yet to be careful. A stack of letters tied with kitchen string, all addressed to Camila at an address in Sao Paulo I had never heard of. The return addresses were from the same street, different apartment numbers. Letters from neighbors, maybe, or friends who live nearby. I didn't open them. A small leather journal, the kind with an elastic band around it to keep it closed. The pages were filled with writing in Portuguese, dense paragraphs that spilled across lines without much regard for margins. The dates went back 6 years. And at the bottom of the box, a second photograph. This one wasn't crossed out. A woman, the same one from the first photo, standing with a man I didn't recognize. They were outside what looked like a cafe, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. Her arm was around his waist. His hand rested on her shoulder in a way that suggested familiarity, comfort, maybe love. On the back, in the same handwriting as before, Camila and Lucas, before everything.
Someone tried to protect me from myself. That's what I kept thinking as I drove home with the box in my trunk. Not Daniel, me. I had been the one to cross out the face in the photograph, to hide the box in storage, to write a letter that explained everything and nothing at the same time. I had chosen to become Sophia, and then I had chosen to forget why. But the accident had complicated that choice. Whatever protection I had built for myself, whatever distance I had put between Camila and Sophia, the brain injury had collapsed it. Now I was someone who didn't remember being either person, holding evidence of both and understanding neither.
At home, I made coffee I didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table with the journal open in front of me. My Portuguese was rusty then, though Daniel said I used to speak it fluently. I had to read slowly, sounding out words that felt like they should come easier. The early entries were mundane: work schedules and grocery lists, and observations about the weather. Camila had worked as a translator for a small publishing house. She lived alone. She went to the same cafe every morning for breakfast. But about halfway through the journal, the tone changed. An entry from October 8th said that Lucas had come by that night. They talked for 3 hours and said nothing that mattered. She didn't know how to tell him that staying in that city was killing her slowly, that every street corner reminded her of things she needed to forget. He would try to fix it. That's what he did. But some things couldn't be fixed, only left behind. Another entry from October 15th mentioned that she had been thinking about her mother's middle name, Sophia. Her mother never used it, but Camila had always liked the sound of it. Clean, simple, a name without history attached to it yet. The entry from October 23rd said she had told Lucas she was leaving. He asked where. She said she didn't know yet, which was true. He asked when she was coming back. She said she didn't know, which was a lie. The entries stopped after that. The last page had a single line, written in heavier strokes, as if the pen had pressed deeper. Camila ends here. Everything else begins tomorrow. I closed the journal and sat very still. The kitchen was warm, but I felt cold. Not from temperature, but from understanding. I had left someone behind. Not just a name or a city, but a person. Lucas. Someone who had mattered enough to be in a photograph, to fill pages of a journal, to be the last thing Camila thought about before she became Sophia. And then I had made sure Sophia would never remember him. For 3 days, I carried the journal with me everywhere, without reading more of it. It sat in my bag at the flower shop, on the passenger seat of my car, on the nightstand while I pretended to sleep. Daniel noticed I was distracted, but he didn't push. He had learned not to push. On the 4th day, I drove to the car in the driveway and retrieved the original letter and photograph. I brought them inside and spread everything out on the guest room bed, the room we never used for guests because I didn't remember who my guests would be. I laid it all out like evidence: the passport, the photographs, one crossed out and one intact, the journal, the letter I had written to myself. I was looking at a map of someone's life, but I couldn't find myself anywhere on it. The way he looked at me, now it made sense. Daniel. The careful gentleness, the patience that sometimes felt like performance, the way he introduced me to my own life as if he were a tour guide and I were a visitor. I had always thought it was because of the accident, because he was trying to help me remember, but what if he had been doing it before? What if Sophia had been his way of loving someone who had already let go of too much? I found him in the garage that evening, working on something with the careful attention he gave to broken things. He looked up when I came in, and his face did that thing it always did, shifting from whatever he was thinking about to a kind of focused concern. I held out the photograph of Camila and Lucas. He took it slowly, and I watched his expression change. Not surprise, exactly. Something closer to resignation.
He said quietly that I had found them. I told him he knew. It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. He said I had told him, before the accident. Not everything, but enough. I had said I had been someone else once, that I needed him to love the person I became, not the person I used to be. I asked if he had just accepted that. He told me he loved me, that he still did. He asked what did it matter what my name used to be or where I came from. I was building something new, and I wanted him to be part of it. I told him I wasn't building something new. I was running away from something old, and he had helped me do it. He looked down at the photograph, at Camilla and Lucas, frozen in a moment of uncomplicated happiness. He said maybe that was true, but it had been my choice to make, not his. It wasn't about him. It never was. That understanding came slowly, over days of reading and rereading the journal, of looking at the photographs until my eyes burned. Daniel had loved me the way I asked to be loved. He had respected the boundary I built between Camilla and Sophia without questioning whether it was healthy or sustainable. He hadn't failed me. He had simply loved someone who was failing herself. The journal entries before the final page were full of things I was starting to understand. Camilla had lost someone. Not Lucas, though leaving him was part of it. Someone else. Someone whose absence shaped every sentence she wrote, even when she never mentioned them directly. One entry said the cafe wasn't the same anymore. She kept expecting to see her in the corner booth, reading with her coffee going cold. But it had been 18 months. And eventually the world forgot to leave space for people who weren't coming back. Another entry mentioned that she had walked past her building that day. Someone had rented her apartment. There were different curtains in the window. She stood there for 10 minutes, trying to feel something other than this terrible certainty that she should have known, that she should have seen it coming, that if she had just called her that night, just checked on her, maybe everything would be different. Her. I read back through earlier entries, looking for a name, but Camilla had been careful. Or maybe the grief had been too large to contain in a name. There were just references, oblique mentions, the shape of someone who had been there and then wasn't.
And then, 40 pages from the end, a single entry that explained everything. It said she couldn't stay in a city that kept reminding her she wasn't there when someone needed her. Her sister died because she was alone. And Camila was 6 blocks away, asleep, unreachable. The guilt wasn't something she could process or work through or heal from. It was structural now. It was in the foundation of every day she woke up in that place. She needed to become someone who didn't carry this. Someone who could live without feeling like they failed the most important test they would ever take. She didn't know if that was possible, but she had to try. She had to become someone else. Some memories hide, not vanish. The doctors had been wrong about that. Or maybe I had been wrong about what they meant. They said my memories might not come back, that the accident had disrupted the neural pathways that stored them, but they had never said the memories were gone, just inaccessible, hidden behind damage and time and the brain's own protective mechanisms. I started having dreams that felt like memories, flashes of a street I recognized but had never seen, the interior of a cafe where the light came through windows at an angle that suggested morning, a woman's laugh, bright and familiar, a conversation about something trivial that felt desperately important. I couldn't tell if they were real or if my mind was just filling in gaps with plausible fiction, but they felt true in a way that made my chest ache when I woke up. I knew who the woman was. Not from memory, but from logic and grief and the accumulation of evidence. Camila's sister. The loss that had been too big to carry. The reason she had chosen to leave everything behind, including her own name. And I, Sophia, was the person Camila had built to escape that grief, a version of herself that didn't remember the cafe or the street or the apartment with different curtains, a version that could live without carrying death as a constant companion. But the accident had done something the original trauma hadn't. It had stripped away the protective layers Camila had spent years building, leaving behind someone who was neither Camila nor Sophia, but something in between. Someone who had to decide what to remember and what to keep hidden. I called the number on the back of one of the letters. It rang 4 times before someone answered. A man's voice, cautious, speaking Portuguese. He asked who was calling. I didn't know what to say. I had rehearsed this moment in my head a dozen times, but now that it was happening, all my words felt inadequate. I asked in Portuguese, that came back to me more easily than I expected, if this was Lucas. There was a pause. Then he asked who I was. I told him my name was Sophia, but I thought he knew me as Camila. The silence that followed was so long, I thought he might have hung up. Then he said, very quietly, that Camila was dead.
I asked what he meant. He told me that was what he had told himself. That's what he had to believe. She left without saying where she was going, without leaving any way to contact her. For 3 years, he looked. He called everyone they knew, he checked hospitals and airports, and tried every social media platform he could think of. And then he stopped, because the only explanation that made sense was that she didn't want to be found. His voice was heavy, with something that sounded like old anger mixed with older grief. He said that if I was calling now, after all this time, I needed to tell him why. I needed to tell him what was so bad that leaving without a word was better than just telling him the truth. I sat on the guest room floor with my back against the bed, holding the phone with both hands. I told him I didn't remember leaving, that I had been in an accident, that I lost most of my memories from before, but I found things. Letters, photographs, a journal, and I was trying to understand who I was so I could figure out who I am now. Another pause. Then he asked if my sister's death was in the journal. I said yes. He asked if I found the part where I blamed myself, where I stopped sleeping because every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, where I told him I felt like I was made of guilt and didn't know how to be made of anything else. I whispered yes. He said he tried to help me, that they all did, but I didn't want help. I wanted to disappear, and eventually I found a way. We talked for 2 hours. Lucas told me about the person I had been before grief reshaped me. Camila, who loved old movies and made terrible coffee and had a habit of collecting beautiful words in different languages. Camila, who had been close to her younger sister, who had felt responsible for her in a way that went beyond normal sibling protection. He told me about the night Anna died. How Camila had been supposed to check on her that evening, but had fallen asleep after a long shift at work. How Anna had called twice, and Camila's phone had been on silent. How by the time someone found her the next morning, it was already too late. The death had been ruled an accident, a bad reaction to medication that Anna had taken incorrectly. Nothing anyone could have predicted, nothing that would have changed if Camila had answered the phone. But Camila hadn't believed that. Couldn't believe it. She had built an entire architecture of blame around herself, and it had become the thing she lived inside. Lucas said she started talking about leaving about 6 months after Anna died. At first, he thought she meant leaving the apartment, maybe moving to a different part of the city,
But then she started asking questions about changing documents, about what it would take to begin somewhere new with no history attached. I asked if he let her. He said he didn't let me do anything, that Camila made her own choices. He just loved her while she made them. He sighed and continued. The last time he saw her, she said something he didn't understand then, but thought he did now. She said she needed to become someone who could forgive herself, and the only way to do that was to become someone who didn't remember what needed forgiving. He asked if it worked, if Sophia forgave Camila. I looked at the photographs spread across the floor, the crossed-out face, the journal full of grief, the passport of a person who had decided to stop existing. I told him honestly that I didn't know, that Sophia never knew there was anything to forgive. A version of me had given up first. That's what I kept coming back to in the days after my conversation with Lucas. Camila had surrendered to grief so completely that the only solution she could find was erasure. Not death, but something adjacent to it, the deliberate ending of a self. And Sophia had been the person who emerged from that ending, not innocent exactly, but unburdened. Someone who could live in daylight without carrying shadows. But now I was neither of them fully. I was someone who knew what Camila had done and couldn't remember why Sophia had been necessary. I was the accumulation of two lives and the inheritor of choices I hadn't made consciously, but had to live with regardless. Daniel found me in the guest room one evening, surrounded by the evidence of my past selves. He sat down on the floor next to me without saying anything, and we stayed like that for a while, in comfortable silence. Finally, he asked what I was going to do. I told him I didn't know, that part of me wanted to remember everything, to know what Camila knew, to feel what she felt, to understand the person I was before I decided I couldn't be her anymore. He asked what the other part wanted. I said the other part was afraid that remembering would break something, that Sophia existed because Camila needed her to, that knowing too much would make it impossible to be either one. He picked up the photograph with the crossed-out face and studied it. He said he thought I wasn't trying to choose between Camila and Sophia, that I was trying to figure out how to be both, how to hold the grief and the forgiveness at the same time, how to remember without being trapped by what I remembered. I asked if that was even possible. He told me he didn't know, but he thought I was the only one who could find out. I went back to Sao Paulo 3 months later. Lucas met me at a cafe near where Camila used to live. He looked older than the photograph, but his eyes were kind in a way that suggested he had decided kindness was more important than anger. We talked about small things first. His work, the city, changes in the neighborhood. He showed me pictures of the cafe where Camila had spent so many mornings, which had closed during the pandemic and become a bookstore. He pointed out the building where she had lived, which looked different but familiar, like something from a dream I couldn't quite hold on to. He asked if I remembered any of it. I told him, not exactly, but sometimes I would smell something or hear a word and feel this pull, like my body remembered even though my mind didn't. He said that was something. We walked to the cemetery where Anna was buried. Lucas had been visiting regularly, keeping the grave clean and bringing flowers. He said it was the last connection he had to both sisters, and he wasn't ready to let it go. I stood in front of the headstone for a long time, without knowing what to feel. Ana Ferreira Torres, 24 years old, beloved sister and friend. The dates on the stone bracketed a life that had ended too soon, leaving a wound that had reshaped everyone who loved her. I said I didn't remember her, that I should, but I didn't. I asked if that made me terrible. Lucas said he didn't think I was terrible, that I was someone who survived the only way I knew how. And maybe that wasn't the healthiest way, but
It was the way that kept me alive. I said Camila thought leaving was the only option. He told me maybe it was. Maybe I needed to become someone else to learn how to live with what happened. He wasn't going to judge that. He paused and continued, but Sophia needed to find out where she came from eventually. Otherwise, I would spend my whole life feeling like something was missing without knowing what. He tried to love me for both of us. That's what I thought about Daniel on the flight home. He had loved Sophia, knowing she was incomplete, knowing there was a whole history she had sealed away. He had loved her anyway. Or maybe because of that. He had given her space to be someone new without demanding she justify why she needed to be. But he had also loved Camila in a way. Loved the parts of her that showed through despite Sophia's best efforts. The moments when she spoke Portuguese without thinking. The way she sometimes stared at old photographs with an expression he couldn't quite read. The quiet grief that lived beneath everything she did, even when she couldn't name its source. When I got home, he was waiting with dinner and no questions. We ate together, and I told him about Sao Paulo, about Lucas and the cafe-turned-bookstore and Anna's grave. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he just reached across the table and took my hand. He asked if I was okay. I told him I didn't know yet, but I thought I was closer to okay than I was before. I kept the journal. I kept the photographs, both of them, even the one with the crossed-out face. I kept the passport with Camila's name and the letters tied with kitchen string. I moved them from the storage unit to a box in my closet, somewhere accessible but not intrusive. Some days I took them out and read through them, looking for pieces of myself I might recognize. Some days I left them alone, content to be Sophia without needing to excavate Camila.
The flower shop became a place where both versions of me could exist. I started keeping a small notebook behind the counter where I wrote things down the way Camila used to. Not every day, and not with the same urgency, but enough to feel connected to the person I had been. I called Lucas once a month. We talked about ordinary things mostly, building a new kind of relationship that didn't depend on shared history or romantic love, but on something simpler. Recognition. The acknowledgement that we had both loved someone who had decided she needed to become someone else, and we could honor that without pretending it hadn't cost something. I started learning Portuguese again, properly this time, not just phrases and functional vocabulary, but literature and poetry, and the rhythms of a language that had once been my first. It felt like meeting an old friend who I had abandoned and who was gracious enough to welcome me back anyway. Daniel watched all of this with patient attention, and one night he asked me what he wanted him to call me. I asked what he meant. He said he meant whether I was Sophia or Camila or both, whether it mattered to me what name he used. I thought about it for a long time. I told him finally that I thought I was Sophia, but I was a Sophia who knew she used to be Camila, who knew where she came from and why she left, who was trying to make peace with both versions without erasing either one. He said that was a lot to be. I agreed, but I told him I thought it was closer to the truth than anything I was before. The memory of Anna came back in fragments, never all at once. A laugh, a gesture, the way she used to steal food off my plate, the sound of her voice on the phone the night I didn't answer. The memories were painful, but they were also proof that she had existed, proof that I had loved her, proof that the grief that had reshaped my entire life had been born from something real and precious and worth protecting. I started visiting a therapist who specialized in trauma and memory. She helped me understand that what Camila had done wasn't weakness or failure, but a kind of survival mechanism. That becoming Sophia had been an act of self-preservation, even if it wasn't the healthiest path forward. She also helped me see that I didn't have to choose between the two versions of myself, that identity wasn't fixed or singular, that I could honor Camila's grief while allowing Sophia to live without being consumed by it. She told me I wasn't trying to go back to who I was, that I was trying to integrate what I had learned, to become someone who knew her own history without being trapped by it. I asked what happened if I couldn't do that. She said then I kept trying. That was all any of us could do. I started a new tradition. Once a month, I went to the storage unit and added something to the box. A photograph from my life as Sophia, a pressed flower from the shop, a receipt from a dinner with Daniel. Small pieces of evidence that this life, this version of me, was worth documenting too.
I wanted whoever found the box after I was gone, whether it was me in another 10 years or someone else entirely, to see the full picture. Not just Camila's grief or Sophia's escape, but the messy, complicated work of becoming someone who could hold both and still move forward. I wrote a new letter and added it to the box. Not to replace the one Camila had written, but to continue the conversation. I addressed it to whoever was reading when they found it. I wanted them to know they came from grief, but they didn't have to stay there. I wanted them to know they made choices that seemed necessary at the time, and some of them were and some of them weren't, and that was okay. I wanted them to know that people loved them even when they thought they were unlovable, that Lucas waited even when they didn't come back, that Daniel loved without needing to know all of their history, that they were worth that love even when they couldn't believe it. I wanted them to know they survived, not in the sense of just being alive, but in the sense of building something worth living for, that they became someone new without destroying the person they were, that they learned to carry grief without being crushed by it. And I wanted them to know they didn't have to have all the answers. They didn't have to remember everything or understand everything or forgive everything. They just had to keep moving forward, one day at a time, with as much honesty and grace as they could manage. They were enough, exactly as they were, broken and healing, remembering and forgetting, becoming whoever they needed to be to survive the next moment and the next day and the next year. They were enough. I signed it with love, from Sophia, who used to be Camila. The last time I took out the photograph with the crossed-out face, I looked at it differently, not as an act of violence or erasure, but as a kind of protection. Camila had crossed out her own face because she couldn't bear to see herself anymore, because the grief was too visible there, too present, too undeniable. But Sophia could look at that photograph now and see something else, not a person who needed to be erased, but a person who had done the best she could with impossible circumstances. A person who loved deeply enough that the loss of that love had required a complete reinvention. I didn't uncross the face. That felt wrong somehow, like I would be erasing the choice Camila had made. But I put the photograph in a frame next to the other one, the one of Camila and Lucas laughing outside the cafe. Two versions of the same person. One crossed out, one whole. Both real. Both part of the story. Daniel found me in the guest room looking at the photographs side by side. He said that was good, that they should be together. I asked if he ever wished I was just one person, just Sophia, without all the Camila complications. He thought about it seriously before answering. He said no, because Sophia without Camila wouldn't be me. She would be someone simpler maybe, but not me. And he didn't fall in love with someone simple. He fell in love with someone complicated and brave and doing her best to figure out how to live with herself.
I asked if that was true even when that meant living with someone who didn't always remember who she was. He said, especially then, because that's when it mattered most. I went back to the car one last time, the car that had held the first letter and started everything. I sat in the driver's seat with the door open and thought about the person who had hidden that envelope in the lining, the person who had written words she hoped she would never have to read. I understood her better now, understood the fear that had driven her to bury her own history, understood the hope that maybe, someday, she could live without the weight of what she had lost. But I also understood that hiding doesn't heal, that erasure doesn't equal peace, that becoming someone new doesn't mean the old person stops existing. I pulled out the envelope and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the paper and the truth it contained. Then I put it back, tucked into the lining where it had waited for me to find it. Not because I wanted to forget again, but because I wanted to remember that some truths take time to discover, that the person I was then had protected me the only way she knew how, and that the person I am now can honor that protection while still moving forward. I closed the car door and went back inside, where Daniel was making coffee, and the morning light was coming through the kitchen window at an angle that suggested grace. I didn't have all the answers. I probably never would, but I had the questions, and I had the willingness to live inside them, to be someone who remembered and someone who forgot, someone who was Camila and someone who was Sophia, and someone who was still becoming whoever came next. And for now, that was enough. If someone has made it this far, I want them to know I'm grateful they walked with me through the hardest room I ever had to clean, the one filled with versions of myself I didn't know existed. I don't know if my story will help anyone listening. I don't know if grief or memory or the weight of who someone used to be is something they might be carrying right now. But if it is, I want to say this. No one has to choose between the person they were and the person they're becoming. Both can be held. The pain that shaped us can be honored without letting it define everything that comes next. The past doesn't disappear just because we can't remember it, and the person we built to survive doesn't become less real just because we've learned where they came from. We're allowed to be complicated, to be made of layers, to be the accumulation of every choice we made to keep living, even when living felt impossible. We're allowed to be enough, exactly as we are. I hope whoever needs to hear this finds its way to it, in whatever way makes sense for them. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for in the end.